I always used to get my fried chicken and catfish at the Shell station on Beacon Hill. That was
The
always
Shell Station.
Yes.
Oh,
you gotta
Ryan,
go to the gas
I was
station.
just there yesterday.
The
They're
gas
the best
station food is
in gas
real.
stations.
Totally.
Great catfish.
Such an American thing. It's one of those things that's like, you know what? This country isn't perfect, but we have like fried catfish with sriracha on it in a gas station. You can
Proud to
go.
be an American.
That's right. I went to a Latte Plaza market, a Korean grocery store in Ellicott City, Maryland. You got the Indian joint next door that sells saris, and then you got the Mexican Korean restaurant next door. They're playing K-pop and then like Celia Cruz and like everything all over the
And it
place.
all
It's like, oh, this is
mixes.
incredible. This is the best country in the world.
I'm
Um,
saluting and I'm crying right now.
It's
Yeah.
time for Sound Politics. This is Sound Politics. I'm Scott Greenstone.
And I'm Libby Denkmann.
And Libby, we have been so caught up in Democrat drama here in Seattle, we have been neglecting one of the most interesting races in the state, full of Republican drama.
Ooh.
And I think probably because it has also somehow been one of the quietest races, has allowed us to kind of ignore it.
Yeah, we are talking about the 4th Congressional District in Central Washington. That's the seat that Dan Newhouse has held for over a decade. That's a guy that we have never been able to get on the show, on any of the other shows that we participate in. He just doesn't talk to media that much. He doesn't hold a lot of town halls.
Yeah.
He's pretty quiet.
He's honestly, I think, maybe the hardest, even harder than Governor Bob Ferguson.
Which is saying something.
Which is really saying something. And maybe I think that he is really interesting because he seems so mysterious to me. I've never gotten a chance to talk
He's
to him.
wrapped himself in a mystique. This is, Scott, the most Trumpy congressional district in Washington state. The president got something like 60% of the vote there in the last election. And yet, Dan Newhouse voted to impeach the president in 2021 after January 6th. He then faced Trump-backed challengers in 2022 and 2024. And Dan Newhouse survived.
Yes.
By the skin of his teeth sometimes, but he survived.
And that's really why he is so interesting. And it is the end of an era because Newhouse is leaving Congress, and the story is no longer will he survive another challenge. Instead, it is who will succeed him. How Trumpy will they be? Will Trump finally get his way in Central Washington?
You and I have been interviewing candidates for this race, but wouldn't you know it, the Trump-endorsed one, the favorite to win, the one once seen as Newhouse's favorite successor, she's also very quiet. Declined an interview with us, politely, but declined.
The shyest, most demure Republicans in the state. Libby, this race is really interesting. There's also another candidate who claims he has the real Trump endorsement, Trump's beautiful signature, he told me. There's a third Republican trying to find that, middle of the road, Newhouse lane.
If that exists.
If it still exists. Big if. But these three frontrunner Republicans represent, I think, three different types of Republican right now, archetypes maybe or something.
Yeah, and then there's a Democrat who might have a shot at making it through the primary to the general election just because so many Republicans are running. Maybe there's a split vote. Only one Republican makes it to November. That means in a Democrat versus Republican face-off for this fall, the Republican likely wins here. So this primary is a big deal for the Republican Party. And it also gives us a little window into where the Republican Party might be going at this moment when our president, the president who is very eager to see what the result will be here, is so unpopular in Washington state.
All of that, the Republican drama, what it says about the Republican Party in Washington state, today on Sound Politics, after a quick break.
From KUOW in Seattle, this is Sound Politics. I'm Libby Denkmann.
And I'm Scott Greenstone, and we're talking about the 4th Congressional District today. That is the Central Washington District that runs from the Canadian border down to the Columbia River. It covers a vast swath of territory, including Yakima and the Tri-Cities. We want to talk about why the race for this district is so interesting.
And to help us with that, we're joined by Orion Donovan Smith, friend of the show. He's the D.C. reporter for the Spokesman Review. Orion, welcome back. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So can you kind of introduce us to the district a little bit more, like the biggest issues coming up in the 4th district, the race for the 4th district?
Yeah, so the 4th district, as you said, I mean, it stretches across central Washington from the Canadian border down to the Oregon border. It is geographically the biggest district in the state. For the same reason, it's the most sparsely populated by land area. And so it's a really interesting district. It is, as you said, the district that has voted for Trump by the biggest margins in the last few elections. And it's, heavily agricultural. You've got the Yakima Nation and the western half of the Colville Reservation there. It's a really interesting district and one that doesn't get as much attention as it probably should.
And so there's also a lot of data centers. I was looking at maps popping up, tariff issues like
Hanford is there, the
Hanford
nuclear
is there.
site, near the Tri-Cities.
Yeah, so much of what Trump is doing, what big tech is doing, seems to be like playing out here in this district.
Absolutely. Data centers are a huge issue. And I was there in May talking to candidates, and they all brought up data centers in one form or another. And absolutely, Hanford cleanup, but also, the post-Hanford, economic hub of the Tri-Cities is huge. And it's also, immigration and immigration enforcement is a really big issue because it's particularly in the Yakima Valley, a whole lot of immigrants, a lot of unauthorized immigrant farm workers who, if you talk to any farmer there, particularly in the very labor-intensive sectors like tree fruit, they'll be honest and say that they rely on those folks enormously. And that has been for the last 12 years one of the big priorities for Dan Newhouse as a Republican in Congress, getting immigration reform done, which, of course, has not happened.
So now that Newhouse has decided to retire, there is a Trump-backed challenger who is favored to win. That would be Yakima County Commissioner Amanda McKinney. She's got the most money in the race. She did decline our interview request, even though we talked to all the other leading candidates. But she told us that she would be willing to do an interview after the primary. So I think that kind of gives you a sense of she feels pretty confident that she will be around after the primary. Orion, what's the backstory on McKinney? How did she get this critical Trump endorsement?
Yeah, it's interesting. You said that she's the Trump-backed candidate in the race, and that's true. What's interesting is she was also the Newhouse-backed candidate until pretty recently. Amanda McKinney, she grew up in the Dalles in Oregon, just over the Columbia River. After a career as a mortgage banker, she worked for Washington Mutual in the Seattle area. She then moved to Yakima and was elected Yakima County Commissioner in 2020. Soon after that, she became one of the only elected Republicans in the district, or, in the 4th Congressional District, to stand by Newhouse after he voted to impeach Trump in January of 2021 for Trump's role in the Capitol riot. And so after that, the McKinney and Newhouse were political allies. And when Newhouse was at least considering retirement in early 2025, Trump had just come back into office, and Newhouse invited McKinney to be his guest at the president's speech to a joint session of Congress. That was, seen as a pretty clear signal that McKinney was his preferred successor. Now, what's interesting is that when Newhouse announced last December he was going to retire, McKinney almost immediately, just days after that, went on stage at Turning Point USA's America Fest event in Arizona and said she had a plan all along to, quote, retire Dan Newhouse to end his career. That, didn't exactly jive with what she had said for the past few years. And as recently as the 2024 election, she was, filming campaign ads and saying Dan Newhouse is the right candidate for this district. So, to the extent that there's criticism among Republicans in the district, people who are not fans of McKinney, they point to that, what they see as a flip-flop and sort of inconsistency in her views toward Newhouse.
So Newhouse's preferred successor may no longer be McKinney. Now, State Senator Matt Banke is in the race. We should be clear that Newhouse has not officially endorsed anyone.
Which I think is interesting, right? Because it's like, does that mean he thinks his endorsement might actually be I don't know, a detriment to someone's campaign?
Impactful.
Toxic? Yeah.
Not clear. But the reason I say that Banky might be the preferred successor is that you mentioned Newhouse took Amanda McKinney to the joint session of Congress, and kind of signaled that she was his successor. Then later on at another joint session, Matt Banky was the guest of Newhouse. I mean, is it fair to say that that's a signal? Orion, am I reading too much into that?
I think that's fair to say. And as you said, Newhouse has not officially endorsed Banky. Without, getting in any conversations I've had off the record with folks, I think it is fair to say that Newhouse's endorsement might not help a candidate in this race. It's a little hard to say that, but in any case, Banky is definitely, running in the Newhouse lane. When I talked to him in Richland back in May, he was pretty clear that he, for instance, believes Trump did not win the 2020 election, which is a major litmus test for Republicans, really since then. And Banky said essentially he would work to continue Newhouse's legacy, pushing for immigration reform. He's still very much a Republican, conservative, but running in that more moderate lane.
I did talk to Banky not too long ago, and he talked about the path to citizenship that he wants to see for farm workers, similar to what Newhouse was working on. He did say he voted for Trump 3 times, and he supports most of his policies. He does differ with Trump on tariffs, just like Newhouse did. When I asked him about what the will in Congress and the will with the White House is to see a path to citizenship for farm workers, and is there actually a way to achieve that if he's elected? He didn't really have an answer for me and started talking about citing police academies in the state. And it kind of reminds me of like how difficult it is right now to sort of thread that line of, I'm trying to be a practical moderate and get things done for the district, but also not completely alienate Trump voters that he's going to need if he ever gets through to the general, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I think if anyone's being honest right now, they would say we're not going to pass bipartisan immigration reform in this Congress, and probably not while Trump is president. The political environment is just not amenable to that. Newhouse's political base in many ways was farmers in central Washington. But of course, the reality of the farm business is that you have relatively few people who own farms, and a lot of farm workers who are not voters. They're non-citizens. Whether or not they're here legally, they're not eligible to vote. And so they're not necessarily a huge part of the electorate, even if, the farmers themselves have been strong supporters of Newhouse over the years.
Yeah. Also maybe not a lot of money to donate to his campaigns, especially with all of the unrest in the export market, partially due to tariffs. I want to talk about the other Republican candidate in this race, a very familiar face, especially when it comes to challenging Dan Newhouse. He is claiming he has Trump's real endorsement, or at least that's what he said to me. I interviewed Jared Sessler this week. He was endorsed by the president last cycle, but he lost that race to Newhouse. His main campaign issue is, hey, I'm endorsed by the president too, or I was last time. He also brings up what you mentioned, that McKinney supported Newhouse in 2024. He's basically calling her a flip-flop on this. He's trying to question her Trump bona fides. I think he told me essentially that like Trump didn't make the Truth Social post in January endorsing Amanda McKinney and doesn't know anything about this race. And I asked him something like, have you tried to bring it up to him? And he said, yes, but it seems complicated. I don't know. He says, I have Trump's beautiful signature. This can give you a sense of how much he's really trying to get the Trump lane.
He speaks the language.
He referred to Biden as the Joe Obama administration, I think, at one point. But so he's basically trying to question McKinney's Trump bona fides and say, I'm the real Trump candidate. Orion, do you think that's working? Do you have any indication of if it is? He says his internal polls look great for him, but he won't share them.
Yeah, so it's hard to say. There has been no independent polling in the race, so we don't really know where the candidates stand at the moment. McKinney has shared polling that was done by Tony Fabrizio, a former Trump pollster who did this work for her campaign. That shows her in the lead among Republicans, and it shows that once voters are told that she's the only one with Trump's endorsement this cycle, her support goes up. So that that would favor McKinney. On the other hand, Sessler has been campaigning basically nonstop in this district for like 5 years now,
Yeah.
and he's quite well known. He is really covered the whole district. And keep in mind, this is a place where, it's fairly sparsely populated. It's not an expensive media market, but it is a lot of ground to cover. So you really, if you're going to campaign in the fourth congressional district, you need to be driving everywhere. And Sessler has done that. You go around the district and you see his signs and flags and, his paraphernalia everywhere.
Mm,
And so I think there's an argument to be made that, people still associate him with Trump. He's been very consistently, a Trump-aligned candidate. And indeed, he was endorsed by President Trump and by lots of, Freedom Caucus members in Congress and other folks, in that lane 2 years ago when he was running again. So when I reached out to the Trump campaign to ask if, in fact, Sessler was endorsed, they said, I was told no, he's not
okay.
this year. And Sessler has also claimed that he's worked for the Trump administration. When I asked him for details of that, he talked about traveling to cryptocurrency conferences in Dubai and Singapore in the last year or so, and where the Trump sons and the son of Trump advisor Steve Witkoff were promoting their World Liberty financial venture. That's something that's
Yeah.
been reportedly more than $2 billion for the Trump family.
Yeah.
And
Huge,
so,
huge windfall for the Trump family.
yeah, and so on one hand, this Trump administration has really blurred the line between business ventures and official government work. But when I reached out to the White House to ask about this, I was told Sessler has not worked for the Trump administration in any kind of official capacity since the president returned to office.
Yeah.
So those are the three Republicans, the main challengers in this race. That's Jared Sessler, whom you just heard about, Amanda McKinney, the official Trump-endorsed candidate, and Matt Benke, who is a state senator and possibly Dan Newhouse's pick to succeed him in Congress. There is also one Democrat in this race. That is John Dureski. And I spoke with him recently. He was super bullish about his chances here in the 4th District.
Which is so funny to me. I mean, I don't know if it's, you got to hype yourself up if you're a Democrat in Central Washington. This is a district that voted 60-40 for Trump over Harris. Let's just be very clear. So the president is, though, unpopular right now. But I think putting a safe Republican seat up for grabs unpopular, highly doubt it.
It seems hard to fathom. I mean, let's get a little background here. Dureski is a former Air Force major and former project control officer at the Hanford nuclear site.
Okay.
He talked about the damage that cuts to that site that have been proposed by the House and the Trump administration could do, especially to local jobs. He also hit really hard the Medicaid cuts that were in the big, beautiful bill that are set to take effect after this next election because so many people in the 4th District are on Medicaid. And yeah, him winning in November is a real stretch. He could, though, get through the primary, right, Orion? Because if he consolidates all the Democratic voters here and there's enough split on the right, he might have a chance to at least compete in November.
Oh, absolutely. I would say he's the clear front runner in the primary. And to be clear, that means he would be, on the ballot in November. Not that he would win in November, but there's one Democrat on the ballot in this primary. There are 10 other candidates. Several of them are Republicans. And so even if Dureski gets a third of votes in the primary, that would set him up and put him in a good position to get to the general. On the other hand, the top Republican who would then be in pole position in the general election might only need 25% of the vote or something. And that creates all kinds of interesting scenarios where you consider Sessler has some kind of floor of support in the district.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know, is that 15%? Is it 20? Is it 25? But he's well known. He has a lot of support, particularly among sort of, Republican activist community in the district, county GOP, precinct committee officers, folks like that.
I mean, we should be clear. He won the primary in 2024 with some big percent of the vote, right?
Yeah, he had about a third of the vote in the 2024 primary. There's something to that. Now, on the other hand, McKinney, let's just be honest, she has a huge fundraising advantage. The Federal Election Commission filings were due yesterday for the second quarter, so this gives us updated fundraising totals for the first half of the year. McKinney had more than $928,000 raised.
Wow.
Benke, by comparison, Benke had like 176,000.
Okay.
Sessler's numbers were not updated yet as of this morning, but he had raised in the first quarter about $400,000 and spent almost all of that, and about half of that money was his own. So, just to give you a sense, money isn't everything, but it does make a difference.
Yeah. That's why I think we're talking about the Republicans in this race here, because this is the primary probably chooses, if we had to guess, which Republican will win in November. And so we talked about McKinney, we talked about Sessler, we talked about Benke. They all kind of represent, in my opinion, maybe three different types of Republicans who exist in Washington State right now. McKinney is in the president's corner right now. She's a kind of Trump establishment candidate. You could maybe compare her to Republicans who were skeptical of Trump term one and have now flipped because they know that Trump is the Republican Party. Benke is that old school moderate Republican. I don't know if we could still call them never Trumpers, but
he would not call himself a never Trumper. He's voted for him 3 times.
But sort of trying to break out of that mold to get more popular with Washingtonians. And then Sessler, I don't know, kind of feels like, I think you've described him before, Orion, as like a Trump term one candidate. Is that, do you feel like are we seeing this correctly, or are we kind of distorting it with our Seattle lens?
Well, you've got a Seattle lens, but even so, I mean, I think
it's Emerald City glasses.
I think how I would describe Sessler is anti-establishment. And the interesting thing here is now Trump is the establishment of the Republican Party. In his first term, he still very much was outside of it, right? There was still a lot of, I think it's fair to say, establishment Republican resistance to Trump. Now what's interesting is, John Dureski, the Democrat in this race, he talks about getting inspired to run in this election by the Bulwark podcast, which is created by a bunch of anti-Trump former Republicans. So like that constituency, to the extent it plays a role in the electorate, the sort of never Trumper former Republican types, they're on board with somebody like Dureski now, with the Democrat. Dureski is a relatively moderate Democrat, I think you could say, at least compared to other Democrats who've run in this district in the past. But it really, all of this just speaks to, the extent to which Donald Trump has sort of subsumed the Republican Party. He's really, dominates it. None of these Republican candidates are anti-Trump, at least publicly.
Dureski also, anti-war and told me that he would vote to end military support for Israel. And so even as he's carving out, kind of a moderate left lane, he's also speaking to some discontent, I think, on the left and the right with some ways that the foreign policy has been run under this president and prior ones.
It's interesting not to downplay the importance of the debate among Democrats over aid to Israel, but that's a very, very much a national or even international issue. I asked Dureski about one of the most divisive, tough issues for Democrats in central Washington, and that's whether or not they would support breaching the lower Snake River dams. And he said no, he looked into it and he wouldn't. Now that is interesting. It puts him, it separates him from, for instance, Devin Poirier, who's an independent candidate or now Cascade Party candidate, who told me when I was out there that he does support dam breaching. And so, that's why I asked Dureski about it. It's one of the few things that really, I think, puts Washington State Democrats in a tough position, especially in, coming from the Tri-Cities.
And as much as many Democrats in Washington State would love to make the campaigns they're running all about Trump, at the end of the day, 4th District folks do want to hear about these local issues that are going to affect their own backyard. Orion Donovan-Smith, D.C. Bureau reporter for the Spokesman Review, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
That's it for Sound Politics. I'm Scott Greenstone. Our editor is Kat Smith. Our producer is Hans Anderson.
And I'm Libby Denkmann. And support from you is the way that this show is made. It's the only way this show is possible. Please consider a donation at KUOW.org/politics. And thanks.
See you next week.